Megan Claire Chase, the Partnership Director for Grit Health. Now, the pandemic has highlighted barriers and disparities in healthcare and amplified the need to address them. This includes clinical trials, which have a history of underrepresentation. Well, Bristol Myers Squibb and Grit Health have teamed up to launch Diversity in Oncology. This initiative is being developed with voices of the underrepresented communities living different experiences. Throughout a series of 4 live interactive sessions, we envision highlighting and raising awareness of the health disparities in oncology to create structural changes in clinical trials. Today, we will be discussing from the diverse patient and caregiver perspective and experience the challenges they face navigating care. We have invited you to share this safe space, and we encourage you to have an open and courageous conversation about health equity and clinical trials. We made a slight change to this session and will not have breakout rooms. Instead, we will have an open Q&A. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat at any point in the session, and we will address them at that time. I'd like to thank the project team at BMS for how genuine they are in thinking of and working together on this project. Their authenticity and focus on hearing the real experiences from the people living them to create change based on those experiences is what makes us proud to be a partner with them on this initiative. So it's time together that we move from rhetoric to real action. To kick things off, I want to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Wendy Short-Barty. Wendy is the Senior Vice President and Head of U.S. Oncology for Bristol Myers Squibb. Prior to joining BMS, she was Vice President and Head of Commercial Operations for U.S. Oncology at Merck. Her passion for oncology is personal. Her mother is a 2-time cancer survivor, and though her father's life was extended through a clinical trial, he ultimately passed away from prostate cancer. Prior to her career in pharma, Wendy was a public defender in Washington, D.C. and Bronx, New York. She is a healthcare Business Women's Association Rising Star and was recognized by them as a luminary in 2020. Her favorite hobbies include painting and reading. And when Wendy isn't doing her favorite hobbies, she is serving as Vice President for GECC, Jack and Jill, and doing philanthropic work to limit the digital divide for children without access to personal computers and internet. So Wendy, the screen is yours.
Megan, thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be with you today. As Megan mentioned, my name is Wendy Short-Barty. I'm the Senior Vice President and Head of U.S. Oncology for Bristol Myers Squibb. Now, I'm relatively new to BMS, but certainly not new to oncology. Now, every day, my core job responsibilities are really, in short, to build the commercial strategies and the operational plans and to execute those plans on behalf of my company. But my motivation is so much more than that. My motivation, my passion is personal. As Megan mentioned, my mom is a 2-time breast cancer survivor, and I lost my dad, my hero, to prostate cancer over 10 years ago. So every day when I show up at work, it is really with the intention of doing whatever I can to make sure people who find themselves with the cancer diagnosis or they find a family member with the cancer diagnosis to make sure that they have access to information, innovation, and care to hopefully save their lives. At BMS, we have made a commitment that we're supporting diversity and inclusion with a forced march. What makes the approach to diversity and inclusion unique at BMS is that the work is being led by people who have a personal connection to and commitment for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. We know how critical it is to hear the voice of diverse patients and to ensure that all patients, irrespective of race or zip code, have equal access to care. So today we will learn about cultural differences, through our panel's lived experiences, where they faced major barriers and challenges based on nothing more than what they look like. Now, when we hear about healthcare inequities, many people, not all, but many people think of things in the distant past, like the Tuskegee experiment, or Black women being subjected to surgery on their reproductive organs without anesthesia, or Henrietta Lacks, which is actually back in the news now. But the reality is, while not as extreme, and maybe not as tragic as those examples, health inequities exist today, and the consequences are profound. In fact, it has a generational impact. In fact, if you look at cancer in particular, the work that was led by the NCCN last year, really did shine a light on disparities in cancer care. And it shows how today it is very real and very relevant and very necessary for us to take action. So we approach this topic to create a space for real and authentic conversations that need to happen. They need to happen so everyone can understand how these issues are impacting human beings. Our moderator, Megan, is going to lead a courageous and necessary conversation today. And so we hope that you lean in with us to really hear, not just hear, to really listen to the stories of people who understand what it's like to live these experiences. Now, as a little bit of housekeeping, there will be time for audience members to talk with individuals, to ask questions, and to share your experiences too. And I certainly am looking forward to that part of today's program. We are so grateful that you are here with us today. We're grateful that you've chosen to take this journey with us and for the change that we'll be part of creating for tomorrow. With that, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time, your attention, and your commitment to what we're trying to accomplish together. And I'll turn things back over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Wendy. So, aside from being the partnership director for Grit Health, I am also a 5-year invasive lobular breast cancer warrior and patient advocate. I'm honored to be the moderator for this session because I share some of the commonalities of the racial bias and dismissiveness of some providers that our panelists will share with you today. So to kick us off, we will hear Judith's story. Judith?
My name is Judith Bella. I am from the Chicagoland area, and I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in April of 2016. I am in complete remission. I'm 5 years, August 2016, the same year, kind of unheard of, but here I am. My journey started off very rough, very, very rough. I felt very bullied, disconnected. I had feelings of mistrust, and I'm grateful that I'm here today to share my story of how I was treated and how I overcame it. And I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. I brought my Kleenex this time. And just share that we have choices, that I'm here. I believe I am here. I was chosen to speak because I fought for my life. I had a prognosis of 6 months when I was first diagnosed. And I begged for a second opinion. And my second opinion oncologist, my current oncologist, my savior, my healer, he got my where I am today. If I would have stuck with my original team, I don't think I would be here today. I felt, again, bullied. They tried to bully me to join a clinical trial, fly under the radar. They didn't hear me. They may have listened, but they weren't hearing me. Many doctors tried to bully me into doing things while I was sedated, heavily sedated. And I fought for myself, and I said, you're not talking to me while I'm in this state of mind. So you'll have to come back. It was 4 months I was hospitalized for 4 months, and the 2 hospitals and 2 rehab facilities prior to my last hospital, one of them almost killed me. Again, bullied into doing things I didn't want to do or understand why I was doing it. But that's my story, and my journey was long, but I am here today to help people understand and realize that You have choices, no matter what color you are, no matter what age you are, no matter what state you're in, you have choices and you have the right to ask them, because there's only one bed, and it's not the doctors or the care team that doesn't believe in your journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. Sheila?
Okay. Hi, my name is Sheila McGlown, and I want to say I'm a 25-year Air Force veteran. And I was diagnosed metastatic breast cancer in 2009, December 2009. So I've been living with metastatic breast cancer now for maybe 12 years in December. I'm currently on a clinical trial. I've been on a clinical trial for 3 years, and I'm thankful that my doctor introduced me to clinical trial 3 years ago, because I had a fourth progression in my fourth rib. But I have heard stories of Black women and men not being even asked to participate in clinical trials, and some of the myths, as they were saying earlier, about racial disparities and the medical mistrust. So I think that it takes a village to educate more about clinical trials and to recruit Black women, especially in breast cancer, because, well, men get breast cancer too, but to recruit Black women and men in clinical trials is very important. And, if I hadn't been on this clinical trial for the past 3 years, would I still be here? I don't know, but I'm thankful that my doctors introduced me to clinical trials. There are a lot of myths, and one I described a couple of days ago was Black women can endure pain. I always say, check your biases at the door and treat me as a patient. Treat me as, someone, as a patient, not as a Black woman, but as your patient. So I'm here today to continue to share my story, and hopefully this will help Black women and men and clinicians and everyone understand that, we're human too. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Ron?
I'm here today because my wife, Joan, had lung cancer. And I'm continuing to be a lung cancer advocate for her and all the others who never smoked, but get lung cancer. Lung cancer affected us greatly. She was 56 when she got diagnosed, never smoked, was active, took airplane trips every month for work and volunteering, and she was just a dynamo. And it was just out of the blue. It was misdiagnosed because people don't expect young women to have lung cancer. People don't understand that lung cancer has killed more women in America since 1987. Lung cancer kills more than breast cancer, ovarian, cesarean cancer combined annually in America. So it's sort of a misunderstood cancer type. And so I'm here to continue to advocate for people with lung cancer. We have 3 sons. When she was diagnosed, they thought that she would, the median survival rate was 8 months. So we didn't know we were going to see our son graduate from West Point. We didn't know we were going to see our kid graduate from high school. And so clinical trials have played a great role in helping her to survive. We went through 15 lines of treatment over 45 months, far surpassing the 8-month median. And 3 of those were phase 1 clinical trials. So when you're the second person in the whole world to take a drug, it's kind of scary, but we were there. Thank you.
All right, Venus?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to the session. And I am so pleased to be around so many wonderful survivors. And thank you and thank God for all of us here. 1957, my mom was one of the victims of the sterilization abuse that took place against Puerto Rican women. And I grew up in that atmosphere of mistrust. So fast forward 1992, I'm getting ready to go to law school. And I found out that the day before orientation that I had breast cancer. And it was only because of an accident that the cancer was even discovered. And when the doctor asked me if I had had a mammogram or or a clinical breast exam, I told him I'm Latina. We Latinas don't get breast cancer. That's a white woman's disease. And it's because back then you only had the studies was really black, white, and other, and we were considered the other. And I was invited to participate in a clinical trial. And after 3 months being on the trial, I kept having dizzy spells. I was really complaining to the CRO about the fact that I don't feel comfortable with this. I'm getting all of these other issues happening health-wise. And it was then that I decided to quit. I left. It was getting to be too expensive, the parking and trying to get childcare. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I quit, and nobody even called me back to ask me why, or I felt like at that point that it was a waste of my time. My sister died of cervical cancer, and I felt really just a sense of disappointment that I had been pushing all of my family to get screened for breast cancer and had very little information about cervical cancer. And when she finally did get diagnosed, 9 months later, she died. And it was because of that experience that I started Dia de la Mujer Latina, a day dedicated to Latina women, where we not only educate them about breast and cervical cancer, but we provide the screening free of charge. And we are now 25 years strong. And I thank God for allowing me to have these extra years to eventually get a granddaughter. Thank you.
Thank you, Venus. So let's talk about stereotypes. Seeing some themes in your stories, I'd like to know, what have you experienced and how does that make you feel? Ron, let's start with you and what your wife went through.
Joan did a lot of traveling, and she was, they figured, oh, it's just travel fatigue, or that you're starting to get arthritis like your mom did, and they misdiagnosed her. And so they assumed that she couldn't have lung cancer. Now, that's not an ethic question, but once she was diagnosed with lung cancer, which was discovered by accident, the radiology didn't believe it. But then they said, oh, you are an Asian woman. At that time, we identified that Asian women particularly have an EGFR mutation, particularly in exon 19. So they looked at that and said, yep, you have EGFR, and so we can get you on a drug called a targeted therapy drug, and it worked really good for a while. But the idea was that they assumed that she couldn't do it, that she had to have this mutation because she was Asian. And the reality is that a lot of Asian lung cancer patients have EGFR, but not all of them. My neighbor, 30-year-old boy, Eric, he got lung cancer. We couldn't figure it out. Why would he do that? Not smoker, highly athletic. And then they said, well, you must have EGFR, and he started treating him with a targeted therapy, and it was a wrong diagnosis. He kept getting worse. And then he said, well, you're a male, never smoker, so must be you have ALK form of lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer. And so they started treating for that. And it's just wrong. We need to have, you can't assume that just because a person is one ethnicity, that they will have that kind of cancer. You need to do broad genomic testing so we can get targeted therapies that address that. And in Eric's case, it turned out that he had a RET mutation. And by the time they got him on something, it was really way too late. And so Eric died, like Joan did, fairly quickly. And so don't assume, as the old meme goes, don't guess, test.
So right. Like Everyone is different. Every body is different. Venus, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
When I got diagnosed with breast cancer, I wanted to learn more about breast cancer and if it was affecting Latina women. It was then that's when I found out that the stats was Black, white, and other, and only New Mexico at that time had any kind of data on Latinas, and actually they call them Hispanics, and there's a big difference. There's 15% Hispanics in this country and 85% Latinos, and the people in New Mexico, the majority of them are Hispanics, so I can understand that, but that didn't account for those of us, you know, from New York or California or any of these other populated states. But I know that to me it was very upsetting not to be able to have the information that I needed. And when I talked to the doctor when I was diagnosed, I asked him, you know, I had all these 20 questions, and he said, I don't have time to answer them, but what I do have is the latest New England Journal of Medicine. And I sat in the car and I just cried and cried because I couldn't get past the first paragraph. And here I was a college educated. So imagine somebody who does not have the education or the ability to even ask the questions, to even demand a response from the doctor. And that's what we don't do. Very little patient care right now in this country. And that's what we're seeing. They come in, they get on the computer, they don't look at you, they don't have a conversation with you. And if you try to even talk about any kind of feelings that you have or any kind of concerns that you have, it's really, they make you feel like, you know, oh, it's nothing, you know, it'll pass. And that kind of attitude is not right. And I'm struggling. I'm still struggling that with my people that are calling me and telling me that that's how they're being treated as well.
It's so difficult, right, Venus? When you're not being heard, and when there is a feeling of an attitude coming from the provider, and you're there to talk about your health, but then you feel you can't. It's really upsetting. And just so everyone knows, audience, Venus is having some connection issues, so that is why she is off camera, so she doesn't sound choppy. So she's still with us. Let's move on to Judith.
Hi there. So multiple myeloma, I was told right away it was an elderly male African-American cancer. As you can see, I'm not elderly, I'm not male, and I'm definitely not African-American. So I felt like, well, why is it me? And they really couldn't answer any questions. And everybody that I've met that has the same cancer that I have, they're not male, elderly, or African-American. So why did they tell me that? And I never really understood like the stats of it, but was it that important for them to point that out to me? I never understood that. And everybody else that I know that has the same kind of cancer I have didn't also have titanium rods attached to their femurs. So I always question that, because the first oncologist bullied me, I was heavily sedated, and my family to make that decision. And my current oncologist, again, I was at that hospital for a long time, got chummy with the nurses, and she basically told me that he said, if she would have come to me first, I would have never put those rods in. I'm not over it, obviously. I'm trying to forgive that doctor and care team and whatnot, but it affects me every day. I was a walker. Nobody asked me what my physical activity was prior to being diagnosed. They would have known. It was my main mode of transportation. I just felt that I was, again, I felt like I was in the dark. And again, I don't know why they told me what type of cancer it affects. As we all know, cancer doesn't discriminate.
So right, so right. Sheila is having some technical difficulties, so I'll jump in real quick and give an example from my own treatment. So the reason why I specifically stated that I had invasive lobular breast cancer, well, before, like once I got that official diagnosis and I was seeing, different specialist, preparing me for treatment for chemo, I was told, are you sure you don't have triple negative breast cancer? I'm thinking to myself, okay, I filled out the form. I distinctly wrote invasive lobular. Why am I being questioned of my own diagnosis? And then it happened again. Are you sure you don't have triple negative? And I'm thinking to myself at this point, well, now you've made me feel like a Black patient. And I was like, no, I have invasive lobular. And then again, this doctor was like, are you sure? Because triple negative is what is prevalent in the African-American community. And I said, well, I have invasive lobular. And I said, if you would look past that, my skin color, you would see I come from a mixed family. And just because I happen to be identify as African-American does not mean that's what I'm going to automatically have. So it was just really upsetting to, because at this point, when you have cancer, and like you just said, Judith, cancer does not discriminate. I was already feeling like I was being seen as just this Black patient who doesn't know what I have, instead of, oh my God, you have cancer, you have invasive lobular, let's get a treatment plan. So that was one of my first big eye openers to this was going to be a difficult time based on my skin. So let's talk about the experience of participating in clinical trials. I'd like to hear from all of you, what barriers have you encountered, and what are some ways that the healthcare industry can take steps to remove some of those barriers? Venus?
Originally, when I was diagnosed, the barriers, of course, was the fact that they introduced me to this clinical trial. I participated, and little did I know that I was one of 3 people that participated in that clinical trial back then. And more than anything, I'd like to share the facts that right now, as I'm trying to educate our Latino community about clinical trials, I find that a lot of the informed consent forms are literally translated and not correctly. They don't conform to class standards. They're not culturally and linguistically appropriate. They're using these terms that are, at a 12th grade and above level. And more importantly, they're using terms that are really derogatory to our community. Like, just to give you an example, you take the demographics as they're translating this information, and they say Black and African American. In Spanish, they say negros, and that word is derogatory for us. The word ensayos means experiments. Who wants to be a subject to an experiment? That's no invitation right there. And so those are some of the issues that I've run into as I'm trying to educate our Latino community about clinical trials and really the value of clinical trials. And, clinicaltrials.gov doesn't have any information in Spanish. It's only in English. So it's for us, those of us who do speak Spanish, we're frustrated because a lot of these websites, even pharmaceutical websites, they don't have the information at a level that people can understand it. So there's some gaps right there. But in my case, there was a lot of other issues, like transportation was an issue, the parking, was a single mom, and the fact that I was being ignored with my questions and concerns. That played a role in my mistrust of clinical research trials. After I realized that they didn't even call me, I kept thinking that was a waste of time, all those months that I was taking that medication. And of course, for months, I just poo-pooed it like it was not the real thing. I mean, don't worry about clinical trials. It's really not a good thing for you. And I would talk to my friends and tell them it's not a good experience, only because it was my experience. And that's what happens. You have a bad experience in our communities of color, and that information is what gets to other people, not any kind of educational material. It's word of mouth. And if it's been a bad experience, that stays in people's minds, as opposed to reading any other articles or manuscripts or anything like that.
That is so true, Venus. And you make a really good point about the language of the forms. And a lot of the language, I had the opportunity to review one for a trial last year, and I was horrified to see the antiquated and often racist comments. And this was a clinical trial specifically for Black men. And I was like, you cannot say this on a form. And then, and what you just said of it being translated, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine if this had been translated, how offensive that would have been. So we definitely need to have those forms looked at and revamped and take out that offensive and often racist language, and then make sure it gets translated and at a level that patients can understand. So thank you so much for that. Let's go to Judith. I want to hear a little bit more about your experience with the clinical trial, because it sounds to me like that doctor wanted to keep it under the radar. What was that? Can you tell us a little bit more about that without naming certain specifics?
Sure. So the oncologist, my first oncologist, after I was diagnosed and whatnot, my family asked for a second opinion. So she gave us two different doctors' names. And the one doctor that she was pushing me towards was offering that clinical trial. I never got in it for the grace of God, but she just kept pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. So I remember I was filling out all this paperwork, connecting with the person that was in charge. And it was difficult. I remember I was like, okay, this is really difficult to get into this clinical trial. And I figured out later why she was pushing me there. It's because she had worked with that doctor. She had been his fellow or resident or whatnot. And that was really the only reason why. And granted, fine. But the second opinion doctor, she wasn't very, I'm not going to say the word kind, but wasn't fluffing him up like she was fluffing up the doctor she wanted me to go to, which I thought was, in my opinion, wrong. She wasn't giving me, really pointing me in the direction like, you should get as many second opinions as you want, do whatever you need to do. And I just felt, again, like she was bullying me to see this doctor. And then I ended up looking this doctor up, and he's great. Sorry, it's about to swear. He has a lot of accolades, but just the way that it was presented, she wasn't giving me enough information to let me know exactly why I should go. And she just kept saying, you should do it, you should do it, knowing that I may not get in it. That's the other kicker of it. It wasn't a guarantee that I would get in. And she just kept pushing me.
Oh,
It was horrible.
That's so frustrating, because ultimately, if a doctor is telling you about a clinical trial, it's because they specifically feel that they think this would be great for you. And it sounds like you did not get that sense at all, right?
None whatsoever. I had no idea even what it was, what they were doing, no information.
Ron, thank you so much. Judith, Ron, tell us the experience that you and your wife had encountered in participating in clinical trials.
Joan participated in 3 phase 1 clinical trials. So phase 1 is the first phase of the whole clinical trial journey, where it's dose limitations and what safety and all that good stuff. And they don't really explain in trials very well that you're a guinea pig. You're not a partner in this. Whatever results come out of this, if you wash out of this trial, they don't really know. And so there's a lot of fear here about what are you doing? Because to say that, I have some sort of noble effort that I'm going to be my guinea pig so that someone else can benefit from it, that's not true. Every patient, I think, who participates in a clinical trial, particularly in the lung cancer arena, is doing this because they're looking for a quality of life, and they're looking for longevity of life. They're looking for survival. When the survival rate of lung cancer patients is 4% in 5 years, that's a pretty low rate. Thanks to clinical trials, depending on the mutation type, you're living longer today. If you are an ALK patient, you can now have a 5-year survival rate in the 20%. But for stage 4, for EGFR, it's still around 10%. So it's, and half of them die within 1 year. The barrier to clinical trials is in my HMO, it's not a vocabulary word. Clinical trials don't exist in my HMO world. So when we pushed to get it, our oncologist, well, she was all for it because she's going to retire in 12 months. So she didn't really care what the rest of the doctors said. Why not? Go put yourself on a clinical trial. Okay, well, here's an NCI cancer center. Here's the doctor. And it went back and forth for 3 weeks. They couldn't figure out how to communicate with one another because it's not an HMO vocabulary to play a clinical trial that's outside of the system. So helping the patient to navigate that was a barrier. The disclosure forms. We've done 3 phase 1s and we tried to get into 2 others. The disclosure forms get longer and longer and longer as time goes on, it seems like. And the amount of tests you have to do. Joan and I were a big advocate of clinical trials because we are convinced that she lived longer because of that. And I think the fear factor for clinical trials for a lot of people, which is why there's such a low uptake, is that people think you're getting a placebo, that you're not getting any treatment at all. And I think we need to clarify to people, particularly in the minority community, that what you're getting is standard of care. We're testing standard of care, which you would normally get, versus the new drug. And so that's important to let people know. I think that most Asians that I know, particularly if they're older, because most lung cancer patients are older, when they get a diagnosis of lung cancer, they go, that's it. This is terminal. The survival rates are so bad. We're not even going to try. And so that's a problem. Not all Asians are the same. When we think of Asian, we normally think of East Asian, like Chinese or Japanese, or maybe even South Asian, Indian. But there's maybe something like in the order of 45 different ethnic groups within the Asian community. And there's something like, and they all speak different languages for the most part. And so when we say translate it into Asian, that doesn't work. You got to pick a language. And so it's really tough to get the qualified translation for that. I echo financial toxicity is a factor within the clinical trial world. Why is it that you, the drug company, you, the clinical researcher, why is it that you get paid and I have to go fork out money on a PK day for my 24 hours of blood draws? I have to pay hotel, I have to pay housing, I have to pay for food, and I have to pay the doggone parking fee. You know, this is a financial problem. Why can't the trials kick in that little bit of money for the valuable thing? Because without the patient, you wouldn't have a trial. So I'm pointing out that this is a problem for helping people get there, particularly on a PK day. And I would like to note that I think we would like to participate if we knew that we would have a better chance of survival. And I think the dilemma is that for a lot of people, they don't know that it's actually going to work. So get past that and know that you need to be healthy sick in order to get in a trial. You can't wait on standard of care until you are so sick that you go like, I need to do a Hail Mary. That ain't going to work because you're too sick now to get into a clinical trial. Clinical trials, they don't take anybody. They take healthy, sick people. You have to have a performance standard, 0 of 1 usually. And that means you're doing okay for the most part. So my advice to people is help them be more informed, help them get past their fears. Thank you.
Such a great point. And everyone, just want to let you know that Sheila, our other panelist, she is having some technical difficulties on her end. So we are trying to get her back. But I can speak about clinical trials as well, because though I am a breast cancer survivor, warrior, my mother, she's an ovarian survivor, but now she actually has a rare blood cancer and she's currently in a clinical trial. And I can say, and I'm going to piggyback off of what Ron just talked about, is debunking those myths. Because when she told me that her doctor, which she has a great doctor who actually said, I feel that you need to be in a clinical trial. We tried the traditional way of trying to figure out how to get your platelets managed, and we feel that a clinical trial, and this specific one, is best. And I was like, oh my God, they're just going to give you a placebo. I was totally under that false impression. So that tells me that the medical industry needs to do a better job in getting that information out, of debunking those myths. And so when she told me this, I was like, are you going to die? Like, who's going to watch over you? But ultimately, as I began to really understand clinical trials, I was like, wait, so you don't have to be stage 4 in order to be considered for a clinical trial. Like, that was news to me. It's been blowing my mind. And then the fact that you're always going to be on some sort of treatment, like you would never get a placebo ever. Like you would, if for some reason that particular treatment in the clinical trial didn't work, you would still be getting your standard of care. And I think if more in our diverse communities understood that there's no way they're just gonna let your health like go, we would be better for it. That's what I think on that. What are some of the things that any of you have seen done well in the clinical trial experience? And also don't forget that if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. Venus, was there anything?
Yes. I want to say that I'm really proud of Baylor College of Medicine. We developed a training for promotores and community health workers to be clinical trial community navigators. And I want to thank some of the sponsors that are on this call, because a lot of our community health workers have embraced the idea of talking to people and really sharing value of clinical trials. And Baylor College of Medicine actually is now hiring these community health workers who are now trained as clinical trial community navigators. So hopefully other entities will do the same, but our training is now nationally distributed, and it's got its pre and post in Spanish and English. But although it's really specifically for COVID, we can translate this to any kind of chronic disease. But I think it's important for all of us to know that when you have a really good idea or a lesson learned, share it. But there's no place we can all share in one place, that one singular place where doctors and clinical researchers can check to see the patient's perspective and get some of this information from us. I mean, it's great that we have this time right now, but how many doctors and researchers are out there that don't have the opportunity to listen to our voices? That's what's really sad.
That is sad. And I like that idea of having a navigator helping you specifically with a clinical trial and explaining everything, because there are so many different parts to a clinical trial. And I think that kind of information would be really helpful, and definitions, but break it down so everyone has a level of understanding as well. As we wrap up this portion of the session before we go into our Q&A, I'd like to ask our panelists, what is one thing that you would like the medical community to take away about the patient experience in a diverse community? Judith?
They have to give hope. I think that's really, for me personally. My first oncologist didn't give me any hope. My second oncologist, same thing. My third and final oncologist, he believed in my journey. And I've told people that fire you have the right to fire your team and find a team that believes in your journey, because that helps with your healing on every aspect. So hope.
Yeah, Megan, this is Venus. For me, I think it's important for our providers, our doctors, our researchers to establish relationships with grassroots organizations that are already working within the community. They're embedded into the community so they can understand some of the barriers and concerns of some of the people in our community. So when they get diagnosed with cancer, they at least have a relationship with an organization that they can reach out to for assistance, especially if they're putting together any kind of promotional or educational material, or even, hey, can you look at this informed consent? Would this fly with your community? Is it written in a way that they can understand it? Those of us who are in the grassroots arena, we're the ones that can tell you if this is going to work or not. I also think that patients and community health workers and community partners should be in any kind of research. They should be there from the beginning as they're designing the protocol. They should be partnering with these entities and get some of the feedback. To save a lot of money, they could get some input on whether this research protocol will work in their specific community. They're the ones that could tell you this is not going to work in my community, try this angle. But I think we need to be invited to be part of that research design all the way through and participating in all the way through until the actual final reporting of the success of the clinical trial. I think we need to be more actively embedded into clinical trials, from recruitment to final reports.
Exactly. Absolutely agree. Ron?
I think there's a lot of good that's happening in clinical trials. There's stuff that could still be improved, of course. But, when you think about what I think they did well, I like the fact that they allowed someone to come into the room with them. The patient was not alone. This lung cancer ribbon says, you're not alone. If you're a lung cancer patient, you feel so alone. And particularly if you're an Asian, you're so private as a culture that you don't want to talk to anybody. You don't even let your own family members know that you have lung cancer. You just say you're sick. And so it's an important thing to feel like you're not alone and that the oncologist does provide hope. It would be, what I found interesting was that, there are different people of advocates on how you can search Dr. Google. Dr. Google is not healthy for most people. But when you open that New England Journal of Medicine, it's like a long slug to click on every word and right click it and say, what does that word mean? What do they mean? And it's a long, hard road to get up to speed. And so having a patient navigator in the room with you is helpful. It's helpful too to have an oncology team that will let you record the patient visit. If you don't have your list of questions ahead of time and then record what happened, there's a clinical study that said 50% of what the doctor says is lost on the patient. The patient either didn't hear what the doc said or they just misunderstood it. So doctors, you should allow the patient and the care team to record the session so they can come back and say, what did they say? Did they really say that it metastasizes to the bones? That's why I have aches. So having a recording is an important thing to allow to come in there. And then if the trials could be designed better so that the scan costs and all the other toxicity costs would be there. I said that we're convinced Joan lived longer because she was on a clinical trial. But the reality is that's because trials require way more scans than the standard of care it allows for. And so those co-pays on that add up. And for some people, they're just not affordable. And so if the trial sponsors could figure out in the budget some money to take care of the patient's burden, I think that would be really terrific.
You really raise a great point in that. And I think what a lot of us, especially in these diverse communities, we don't understand the cost. Like, what is it that we're as the patient responsible for, and then what is covered, and then even I'll throw this out too. What happens after there is approval of this? Will we now have to pay for this drug that would not be generic? Yeah, like you said, lots of different factors and lots of confusion and questions that we need answered. Well, now we're going to open it up for Q&A, and I'm excited to see some questions coming in for our panelists. So let's get to it. So this is for all of you panelists, and we do know Sheila is still trying to get back in, and we're sorry about that. So I'll just keep jumping in for her. Okay. What do you think are some actions that pharma and healthcare providers can take to create a relationship and build that trust between them and in these diverse communities? Any one of you can jump in.
I could answer that. I think it's important for the pharma to really get to know the specific communities of color, their issues, look at the numbers, and also check out what organizations are actively working with those particular patients, and really, instead of putting so much money into research institutions, that academic research institutions that only want to study something that we already know on disparities, is put that money toward removing some of those disparity issues that our community goes through. I don't see the investment, and I must say that I see it in some, like BMS is one that is invested in its community, but the others, Pfizer is another one that's invested in its community. But I'll tell you, the others that I've seen along the way, I don't see that involvement. Some of these pharmas already have what they call multicultural advisory panels, groups. Engage in those. Start putting together those kinds of groups together so they can be there as a focal point, as to give you some feedback as to what you could do better. I can't say enough about some of the websites of some of the pharmaceuticals. Reach out to those of us in the community. We can actually list all the errors in Spanish translation, and perhaps in Chinese and other translations in the Asian community. We can actually tell you all the errors and how important it is for you to change that. And like I said, the ensayos word, it is still being used by CDC, and ensayos means experiments. You cannot use that word if you want people to be excited about a clinical trial. And again, lately we've talked a lot about the immune compromise. Well, right now, the word for immune compromise is inmunitario deprimido, and deprimido means depressed or sad. So if somebody sees that word, they're going to think that your immune system is sad. They won't understand that it's totally different, but they're getting the translation done from from Spain dictionary. And so that's what I'm trying to say, is go through your website, have somebody review the website, contact those of us that are a grassroots organization already in the know on, especially have a focus on health literacy. We can tell you what you can do better to really attract those of us in the communities to learn more about what you're doing and to learn more about your clinical research trial in a way that is culturally and linguistically appropriate.
That is such power right there. And I agree with Jenny that all patients should just be referred to as rock stars, VIPs. Yes, we should. Anything else to add on that question before I move to the next one?
Tell me the question again.
What was the question? Hold on, let me get back to it. It was, what do you think are some actions pharma and healthcare providers can take to create a relationship and build trust between them and the different diverse communities?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
But having appropriate language is always helpful. Having appropriate representation within the advertising. I would actually advocate farmers should never advertise on TV. I think TV advertising for drugs just misleads expectations of people, that somehow they look at these wonderful images on the television, that when they go in, they'll be like those people on TV. And it's not true. Each one of us unique. Each one of us has a unique cancer. And even though you might have lung cancer and she has lung cancer, our lung cancers are different because our bodies are different. Our comorbidities are different. And so I would say, let's make reasonable expectations for people, and let's not spend the money on advertising on TV. Let's go out and advertise through trusted sources like supposedly your doctor. In the Asian community, there's high trust among the doctors. Even though I tell them, don't trust the doctors. They have, your oncologist is a general oncologist. They believe there's so much advances to do, they can't figure it all out. So you need to find a specialist in your lung cancer type. And so building that trust and using the trust you do have and build it would be good. Spending the kind of money that I know it costs a lot of money to do drug development, and I appreciate that it's a hard road to get to FDA approval, but it's just, if you want to get more people participating of different ethnicities, then this will help to get them there.
I hear you about the the advertising. It is misleading because it makes it look like there's no pain, there's no discomfort, smiling, getting certain, injections or medications, and not talking about how those side effects can actually make you feel. So do agree with that. Jude, I'd really love for the audience to hear about like the trust that was built, and talk about that as an example with your, was it your third oncologist, the one that truly saved your life, as you like to say?
Yes, Dr. Bichron. He is my eternal savior. He heard me. He listened and he heard me. He gave me options. He didn't dismiss me. He actually listened to me, and he knew when I was feeling down, and he knew when I was scared, and he took the time to ask me why. And then he just made me feel that I could battle this. And I did. If I didn't have him by my side, and he visited me every single day, unless he wasn't on shift. So what, 1 weekend a month, I wouldn't see him every single day. Sorry, once again, I'm not sorry. This is an emotional thing for me because we are eternally bonded. What set him apart from everybody else is when I was getting wheeled into that hospital at 10:30 at night in a Greg bed or Craig bed, whatever bed it was, all the nurses were saying, oh, this is your doctor? Oh my God, he's great. He has brought people back to life. And he followed through with what everybody was saying about him. And I had never, ever, ever heard anybody talk about a doctor the way that these nurses talked about him. And when I saw him the first time, his approach was just different. He was kind. He listened. He didn't make me feel that he was smarter than me. He actually listened. And when I asked him about things, he knew that my approach was ignorance is bliss. I didn't want to know everything. I didn't want to know the side effects. All I asked him is, what do I need to do to get better? What's my homework? And he would tell me, eat, sleep, drink water, exercise. And that's what I did. I was adamant about completing everything on that list. Sleeping was hard though. That was the hardest thing. But he put himself up there. He raised the bar, and he's my guy forever and ever.
I think you bring up a really good point, and with building that trust is meeting the patient where they are. I had a similar experience with my breast cancer surgeon. Amazing. Like, I totally want to be her bestie, because when she walked into that room, and of course, this is very serious, cancer, but my mother and I just happened to been laughing about something because I was just like, I can't believe both of us mother-daughter cancer, you know, it was like a mother-daughter bonding moment. That was really strange. And she walked in on us like that little laughter. She was like, oh, finally, a patient that doesn't act like they're dead. And I died laughing because she could tell that I had a sense of humor because she read the room. She read me as a patient. And when she spoke to me, and these are, of course, medical terms, and I think it's important that the providers and clinicians hear this, that remember these medical terms that you're saying, they roll off your tongue. You know what they mean, but you need to remember who you're talking to. And as a patient, she would talk about these terms that were foreign to my ears, but break it down, not in a way that sounded like she was talking to a 5-year-old, like it wasn't condescending. She broke it down so I could truly understand what it was, because she's like, she said, it is your right to know exactly what these mean. And it was also taking that time. I never felt rushed. And I think that's also a problem with care and even being considered for a clinical trial too, is the lack of time with our doctors, because we're feeling that they're not really present with us. And we can already tell that they're already thinking about the next patient. And so I wish that there could be more time in between patients. And so even when a doctor's late, for me, I think to myself, you know what, that patient needed that extra time. I'm going to be patient because I might need that extra time too. So just throwing that out there. Here's another question for our panelists. How often during care or during your clinical trial experience did you encounter any medical professionals of your same racial background?
I can actually say none.
Wow.
Yeah, among doctors, none, but nurses, yes. I would like to point out radiologists. It's all kind of off topic, but so much of what we do requires an MRI or an X-ray or a CAT scan. Someone's got to teach the radiologist how to use different language that is translatable to the layperson and not scaring the bejeebers out of them when they read what they write. You have to learn, if a lung cancer patient, that the word remarkable is actually a good thing, or unremarkable is a good thing. And so, overachiever Asians don't want to be unremarkable, but that's what you really want to be if you're a cancer patient.
That is so true. I have some friends who have brain cancer, and like you said, with all of us, actually, we want to hear that we're unremarkable. That's the one time that's a good thing. So I wanted to ask you, have any of you ever felt that there was that ageism was at play?
I think ageism in lung cancer is actually pretty common, because the majority of lung cancer patients are over age 65. And that's why this growing, within the lung cancer community, the growing number of young people under age 40 who has had lung cancer, particularly among women. Women who have non-smokers who had lung cancer under age 40 has doubled in the last 10 years, the rate of incidence. So, and they don't know why. So it's sort of a reverse ageism, to answer your question.
I can actually say too, with ageism, I was diagnosed under 40. And so when I kept going to the doctor talking about, something is going on with my body, I'm having these weird symptoms, I was constantly told, well, you're too young for that. You're too young for that. You're too young for that. And I just kept pushing because I knew something was not right. I did not display the typical breast cancer symptoms that a white patient would. And it was really frustrating to constantly be told, well, you're too young. And then once I finally got the diagnosis of breast cancer, then it became a matter of, well, you're too young to get this particular scan. You're too young to be considered for this or for that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, cancer has rapidly aged my body now. So can we think about me internally, the age, and not the external of the age? That was something I felt really strongly about. It was difficult being diagnosed under 40 and being taken seriously, even once I got the cancer diagnosis and then eventually made it to the survivorship stage.
I think we're too conservative on the fear that taking an extra scan will somehow shorten your lifespan. The reason we want to scan is because our lifespan is already being shortened because of a disease. So knock it off with, I don't want to need to give you more scans. Just do the scan, and so we don't guess. We are testing.
And that's covered.
Yes, and it's covered.
So another question would be, so I know with me, when I got diagnosed, I did go to Google a little bit there, but then I tried to find like reputable resources to really talk about like my specific subtype and all of that. Did any of you find any really great resources that doctors could actually recommend to their patients that helped either when you were starting your clinical trial or at the start of your diagnosis? Were there any great resources and sites that helped you?
That means we have to name groups, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, we're not naming any medications, but was there like something specific that was just a really great resource that would list, things that would help you as a patient? Like, where did you find the clinical trial? Did the doctor tell you about it, or did you actually search it? Did you search other sites other than clinicaltrials.gov?
I can answer for the lung cancer community. I can't speak to the others. But within lung cancer, there's there are reputable sources, and then there are sources that they're just like everything else on the internet. There's so many people on the online forums that you don't know what to believe anymore. But I would say anything from longevity for lung cancer, or from the Go-To Foundation for lung cancer, those are very reputable resources. So is the Lung Cancer Research Foundation. I hate to say this, but I would not go to a forum that has have the American Cancer Society or American Lung Association for lung cancer. There's too much of an emphasis there on just smoking cessation as a strategy for stopping lung cancer. Excuse me, if you already have lung cancer, we're not worried about your smoking or not. We're worried about finding treatment to cure and navigating a roadmap to keep you alive as long as you can.
Another one that was mentioned here in the chat, Mark Farrow, thank you, the Chris Draft Foundation for lung cancer as well. So
yeah, and the White Ribbon Project is a new one that's coming up. It's that's actually initiated by patients out of Philadelphia who are just like, they're awesome.
Fantastic.
Handmade ribbons out of wood.
It's fantastic. So got some other questions coming in for you panelists. So
this is Venus. I just wanted to share something. I've noticed that there's been a lot of effort to get a lot of good resources for COVID-19, and in different languages, and they have the videos, and they have all kinds of wonderful information on COVID. I wish they would have applied that for cancer, for all of our cancers, because I think the resources are there for COVID. And within a year, we had all of these resources. Why, in all these years of going through my breast cancer, my sister's cervical cancer, Ron's, lung cancer, why is it that we don't have these resources that you see for COVID?
Oh, that is a good point, because then that would take care of all that misinformation out there and having reputable resources and reputable information. So Good point there, Venus. Here's another question. So in your experience, do you think that there are different experiences of diverse populations in different parts of the US? So considering where you're from, I'm from the South. I can tell you yes, but I'd love to hear from all of you.
So I have a son who's in the Army, and in the Army, everyone from the private all the way up to the general, they get the same wonderful treatment from TRICARE. That's not to say it's great treatment, but they get the same treatment. And so there was a study showing, on lung cancer, that the incidence of lung cancer among Black and white people were the same in the military. And the outcomes of treatment for survival were the same. And so somehow having equal access for all and having the same trusted source of treatment will make the same. And I think that, in our healthcare system today, that's not necessarily true. There are deserts where healthcare is being provided. And that affects then racial inequality.
And our organization, we're in 39 states and including Puerto Rico. And I can tell you that working with our community in South Florida with the predominant Cuban community, they are very, they're gung-ho on clinical research and the latest on what's going on with COVID. I mean, they're really up to date on all of these opportunities, but when we go to like the border in California or Texas, totally different community. The access issues are very poor. The language, like Ronnie said, just all of these barriers are there, where you don't see those barriers in places where you have a more, how should I say, a more wealthier group of Latinos, more business Latinos in South Florida than you would in places like the border. So as far as my community, I adapt my training and educational materials to specific communities depending on where I'm going. One size does not fit all.
Absolutely. Judith, did you have anything else that you wanted to say on this? Or should I move to the next question?
You can go to the next question.
Okay, so
Thank
panelists, how can we educate pharma about understanding that our different communities, our unique fears, needs, and concerns? Because I think for me as a Black woman, like, I feel our providers, especially the white ones, need to understand that it wasn't so long ago, like Wendy Short Barty, our keynote speaker, said, like, it's still happening. This is still current. So I wish that they would learn about the history, but also understand how we're talked to and believe us when we say that we're being talked down to, because I've often been told I've been too sensitive. And that is a huge insult. So what can pharma do, or what can we do to better educate pharma and our healthcare providers on our unique concerns?
I think that we need to stop looking at people or patients as a person who has a certain nationality or heritage, because all of us bleed red. It doesn't matter who you voted for president, you still bleed red. And so we need to look at getting the insurance companies as well as pharma and the medical community to treat us all as individuals and take a look at our own blood profiles. Whatever we can get on the biopsies which show you that we have the opportunity now to get precision medicine targeted toward your particular cancer type. And so that, when we take these meds, at least in the lung cancer community, they're targeted. We're not killing all the good cells as well as the bad cells. We got medicine that can target just the bad cells. And that's what we want to do is be treated as individuals with personalized medicine and get us toward that. The fact that we don't test comprehensively for testing for our genomic mutations is a failure of the system at this point, that we only limit our tests to maybe the big 7 in lung cancer, as opposed to comprehensive testing for everything.
Venus or Judith, do you have anything to add on that one?
You know, I could say that when I was taken back when I was presenting the whole training on genetics and clinical trials to my community health work, my promotoras over in the Valley. And it was there that I found out that they really didn't want to discuss that because in certain communities, especially in the Mexican community, they celebrate Day of the Dead. That is a homage. And the last thing they want to do is think about that person who's passed on, and those genes are now in you, and now you have cancer because of hereditary. And so they didn't want to know. And so these are some of the cultural norms for some communities. And I think the pharma and some of the medical providers and researchers need to understand a little bit more about these cultural nuances. But that particular one blew me away, but I didn't realize that, you know, we hear about the celebration of the Day of the Dead, but little did I know that they pay homage, and the last thing they want to do is think about having cancer because my mom had the gene, or my grandmother did, you know, was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that was an eye opener for me. But I think it's important for those that really want to get to know our community to establish those relationships with those of us who are already embedded in these communities.
It's also helpful to understand we're talking about genomic testing, which is what is your particular cancer that's inside you, it's shedding in terms of mutations. It's not genetic in the sense that it's inherited, it's genomic. So, I mean, that distinction is often lost on people.
I just wanted to just do an overview as far as like medications and whatnot, is that with the medication, you also have to do other things besides take the medication. And that's have a good diet, you know, not poisoning yourself with other things besides, you know, the cancer that's eating up your body, like, you know, just a clean diet, making sure that you're exercising, making sure that you have the elements on your skin, that you have sunshine, that you're hydrated. And most importantly, that you're positive, that you believe that you're going to work through this. And I think it's really important, you know, and when Ron was talking about all these advertisements with, you know, all these medications, and then they talk about all the side effects, you know, well, what about the other things that we can do too to help these drugs maybe be better? And that one of the things that I believe in is a clean diet, getting rid of those rancid oils that's in everything.
And to listen to your oncologist, because a lot of the treatments in lung cancer, your body will be worse if you get sunshine because it's EGFR based. So it's important to know that not all cancer types and their treatment responses are the same. I mean, we get split fingernails, and there's neuropathy and all sorts of other things that can happen depending on what you have.
Oh, I had all that too, Ronnie.
Well, now you're talking ageism.
Well, you know, I was going to also mention too that I wish that pharma and and the healthcare providers, like, tell me the possibilities of what could potentially happen, because I experienced a plethora of side effects all at once, and I was shocked. And I was like, okay, this isn't what I'm always hearing. Like, I knew, of course, that I would lose my hair due to the type of chemo, and there was no way for that. But there were so many other things where the palms of my hands and feet were black because they burned from the chemo, and no one told me that. So I'm all like, oh my God, what's happening? They're like, oh, that's no problem. I see that all the time. That was so dismissive. So I really feel that you need to set your patients up for success and telling them, say, look, we're not saying you're going to get every single side effect here, but I want to alert you or give it to your caregiver and say, these are the possibilities of what could happen. And the way you find that out, because I'm sure some might be thinking, well, we don't know all of the possibilities. Well, if you talk with your patients and they're coming and telling you stuff, that's something that you should write down and put together like a little, you know, one sheeter or something based on that particular type of chemo or if there are certain things that are in common that can happen with any type of chemo that you're on, say something. And even with radiation, I burned badly. And I was often told, oh, you might get a little bit of a burn. Well, I think you need to look at my skin color, you know, and I burned, I actually felt like a burn victim. My skin actually came off. And so I think that's a big missing piece too, is set us up and give us the information and the possibilities of what could happen, but don't dismiss us when someone of color is coming to you saying, hey, I've got this. Oh yeah, well, I've seen that all the time. That's really harmful to us, because then that'll keep us quiet and we may not report something that a side effect that could actually be super duper harmful and that we should have. So that's just my little 2 cents on that. But thank you so much, panelists. We'd like to thank everyone for attending our first session of Diversity in Oncology, this new initiative. And I'd like to give a huge round of applause for our panelists, Ron, Venus, and Sheila. So sorry that you're having some tech issues, and Judith. And I'd love to thank our keynote speaker, Wendy Short-Barty, and the project team at Bristol Myers Squibb. For more information and or additional questions, see in the chat with our contact information for the session. We will let you know when the recording of this session is available, along with resources. So go ahead though and put a hold on your calendar for November 16th. That is our next session, which will be called Experience of Diverse Physicians and Clinical Research. So more details to come on that, but thank you so much for joining us today, and y'all have a great rest of your day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.